Let's dig deeper now with Republican Congresswoman Victoria Spartz. She is currently serving on the House Judiciary Committee and the Subcommittee on Immigration and Citizenship. Congresswoman, we're grateful that you're sharing part of your weekend with us. Just quickly, I want to get your response to what you're seeing unfold in places like Martha's Vineyard.
Well, let me tell you, I actually went to the Texas border 3 times last year. And the situation is very dangerous, and it's a very serious situation. And I'll be honest with you, Democrats are playing politics with people's lives. And these poor people become hostages to cartels. They've been sold to, in slavery, and it's pretty bad. And I think cartels are making a lot of money. It's opened up our border. It's a very serious situation. So when we're talking about crisis, it is a serious crisis. It's a national security crisis. And I hope that we stop playing politics and look at it on a bipartisan basis. I asked my colleagues to actually, let's just work about that. Let's just find a solution to our legal immigration, but also secure this border, because this is bad for the people, the poor people that come into this country, and desperate people. It's bad for our country, it's bad for everyone, and no one is wanting to do it, and it's unfortunate. So I'm glad at least we start talking about it, and hopefully we continue doing that.
Congresswoman, I want to play some sound for you from Rachel Self. She is an immigration attorney that's representing some of the folks that were sent to Martha's Vineyard. Listen to this.
They were lied to again and again and fraudulently induced to board the planes. They were told there was a surprise present for them and that there would be jobs and housing awaiting for them when they arrived. This was obviously a sadistic lie. Not only did those responsible for this stunt know that there was no housing and no employment awaiting the migrants, they also very intentionally chose not to call ahead.
Congresswoman, it sounds like some of these migrants were lied to about where they were going when they were put on planes headed to that island. You and I have something in common. You were born in the former USSR. You're an immigrant, and just like I did when I was a child, you came to this country fleeing totalitarian Marxism. These Venezuelan migrants are trying to get away from a very similar kind of oppression. Do you think the way they're being treated is appropriate? Is this how you would have liked to have been treated when you came to the United States?
Well, I'll tell you something. I feel sorry for these people, because the first time they get lied, when the cartels in the countries from Northern Triangle lying to them, and we're allowed to have bad policy in the border. They're being taken advantage by cartels. I'm actually going to meet with Ambassador of Guatemala this week. We need to deal with the situation. These people are becoming hostages. They're becoming enslaved and sold to very, very dangerous organizations. They take control of the border. They control in our southern border. So these people are pawns. But what our policies at the border created opportunities for them to take advantage of these poor people. And I feel sorry for them, but we cannot open this border.
Respectfully, Congresswoman, I don't disagree with you at all about the cartels taking advantage of migrants. It is well documented. I'm wondering what you think of what these Republican governors have done to these migrants once they've arrived in the United States. They apparently were misled and put on planes and buses not knowing where they were going, told they were going to be helped by a humanitarian organization that does not exist. Is that how you would have wanted to be treated when you arrived in the United States as an immigrant?
Well, I came in the United States legally, and I actually came and paid for my ticket and followed the rules, and I came to the United States actually with a long wait to be able to follow these rules. So I think we need to find legal ways for people to come here, because when you create first incentives to come illegally, people will be abused by the system. And I think that is what we're creating right now. We create incentives for these poor people to be taken advantage of. So we need to find a good way to legally for people immigrate to our country better, because it benefits our country. We're a country of immigrants, but we're also a country of law and order. We cannot have lawlessness. And I think that is something we have to have discussion. But I'm glad at least we're talking about these issues, because we have a hard time raising awareness. And I think, at least my Democrat colleagues start talking about it. And at least the Democrat mayor of New York is talking about that, it's a crisis, because it has been a crisis for a while in the state of Texas. And no one wants to look at that. And it is a humanitarian human crisis. It is a national security crisis. And I hope we can have a productive conversation, not a political one, because this is where we have human lives. We have people at stake. We have a border patrol overwhelmed. We have a lot of bad people can come cross that border. So this is a very dangerous situation. And I think it's not time for politics, and we need to find some solutions.
Congresswoman, I have not heard you give a judgment on whether you think these Republican governors like Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott and Doug Ducey are treating these migrants appropriately. Do you agree with the tactic that they are using?
Well, you have to look into that. I wasn't there, so I don't know what exactly is happening there. So I'm not going to make some comments on something that wasn't there. So I think, people are going to look into that, what they treat or not. But I'll tell you one thing, raising awareness about this issue by these governments, I applaud them for doing that, because we need to raise awareness. We need to make sure that we, as a country, stay dealing with this situation, and how that's treated, how it's not treated. I think we have to look into detail. We have enough people to look into that. So I don't want to comment something that I only heard from other people. So that's all politics.
There will likely be an investigation into what these migrants were promised, but specifically what these governors have acknowledged. Ron DeSantis acknowledged that he had these migrants get on a plane to Martha's Vineyard. He joked about it. He laughed about it when he was talking to reporters. It's well documented what they are doing. Do you agree with the tactic? Do you agree with what they are doing with these migrants?
Well, I think, it couldn't be just a problem of southern states. The other states need to understand, but I also don't understand such a thing as sanctuary cities. The federal government should have a policy that applies to all of the states. There are states' rights, there are federal responsibilities, and immigration policy is controlled at the federal level. So I don't think cities should be able to circumvent federal laws and provide, illegal people to be able to stay in the country. I think there are a lot of problems happen with that, and I think we have to start a discussion on that. But I think what was happening right now, and we're talking about the issue, it's very important, and other states needs to understand it's not just problem of Texas or Florida or Arizona or California. It's a problem all of us. We don't have borders from other states. Other states need to understand that this is a real problem with real people. When you have Border Patrol overwhelmed, when you have this local communities at Texas have influx of enormous amount of people, it's a problem. So it is a problem for Martha Vineyards. It is a problem for Texas. And I think the Martha Vineyards, you need to understand, these people come with big numbers, and they don't have resources to deal with that too. And we cannot just make it a problem on one state, because the state is really overwhelmed right now. It's a huge problem for the state of Texas. And as as an Indiana representative, I feel I have to help my other states too. It is my duty, because ultimately we are a union of states. And if federal government drop the ball on issues, we have responsibility to help each other to secure our country.